I married Stephen Hale when I was 25, and I thought the way he curated my life was love. He picked my clothes, my shampoo, the coffee I drank, the art on our brownstone walls in Boston, the playlist that murmured through the kitchen as I folded his shirts. He said it was because I worked too hard as a nurse and deserved not to think about the little thing. I believed him. For 3 years, I believed him. The day my sister flew back from Europe with divorce papers and a suitcase that looked like a billboard, I realized the mirror didn't show me. It showed her. The lipstick shade. The bob haircut with the soft wave. The exact candle she once posted on Instagram, a woodsy scent Stephen hated, until he bought a case and lined it on our mantel. Vivian always glowed in curated light. He'd found a way to make me glow like her. That morning, I was supposed to be checking vitals in Oncology B, but I was in imaging with a gown tied crooked and a tech who kept his eyes kind and far away. My last period had vanished into stress 3 months earlier. The ultrasound had the hush you feel in churches. A second scan. A call upstairs. Blood work. A colleague took my hand while the oncologist, someone I knew, someone who'd smuggled cupcakes into break rooms on 12-hour shifts, explained in careful sentences that my uterus had grown a garden I'd never planted. Uterine cancer. Mid-stage. There are paths, she said, gentle. Doctor. Hale is excellent in this subspecialty. Do you want me to call him? Stephen was excellent. He was also not picking up his phone. He'd stepped out for 10 minutes, hours ago. I said I would tell him myself and walked out with the report tucked under my arm, like homework I could still do right. On my home screen, Vivian's story bloomed across the top, her cheek pressed against Stephen's shoulder, both of them grinning in airport light. Caption, home. My thumb slid. Their photo expanded. Her hair. My hair. Her red scarf. My red scarf, a gift Stephen insisted would warm my complexion, even though I preferred navy. I stood in a bathroom stall with the phone cold and heavy in my palm and smashed my reflection with the moisturizer bottle Stephen had ordered on automatic delivery. As the glass cracked, the truth landed: he hadn't been caring for me. He'd been reassembling me. A stand-in. A portrait that breathed. I waited for him with the report on my lap. He came in close to midnight, smelling like the kind of whiskey executives pretend to savor. The smile still hung at the corner of his mouth, a relic from the airport. It vanished when he saw me awake. He started to shrug off his coat, and I noticed the kiss of a lipstick smear on the charcoal lapel. Not my shade. I told you to eat without me, he said, and hugged me as if we were fine. When he turned toward the bathroom, the test results fell from my hands and skidded across the hardwood. He didn't pick them up. He didn't see them at all. In bed, with his arm a weight across my waist, he asked, voice soft, clinical, detached, "What did you want to tell me?" Did Vivian get in okay? He went still. The warmth left my back as he pulled his arm away. Grace, he said, my name a warning. Don't do this. Do what? This, he said, meaningless and loaded. Then, can we just be how we are? How we were? Which meant I stayed quiet and useful and styled like the woman he couldn't have. Which meant the 3 of us in a house, 2 of us in a bed, 1 of us on his breath. I set my phone face down and watched the ceiling until dawn. In the morning, I did not iron his shirt or grind his beans or perfume the kitchen with cinnamon. I pulled on jeans and an old white shirt I'd loved in college before Stephen called denim too juvenile on you. I drove across the river to a different hospital where no one would try to protect me from what I already knew. The second opinion added a complication the first hadn't found. I was pregnant. The obstetrician spoke softly, tapping a diagram with a capped pen. The tumor's location, the baby's gestational age, the math of risk. If we intervene now, she said, future fertility is unlikely. If we delay, we endanger both of you." She paused as if there were air thick enough to make any choice easier. "Do you have someone with you?" I shook my head and walked out, carrying a folder that felt like a detonator. On the sidewalk, I called my mother. She answered on the second ring as if I were a telemarketer she regretted picking up. "What's wrong?" She said, flat. "I need advice," I said. "If I did something that might wreck the rest of my life, what should I do?" "You're an adult," she said. "Adults live with consequences." My father's voice floated from the TV in the background, the Red Sox, probably. "Who is it?" he asked. "Nobody," she said, and hung up. I pressed my palm to my belly on that cold sidewalk, even though the baby was a rumor on a scan and a swirl in my blood. "You're mine," I whispered. "You're the one, warm thing." Back at our hospital, I walked into Stephen's office and found him adjusting Vivian's coat on her shoulders. She looked pale and exquisite, the way a model looks in winter curated fragility. "Grace," she said, smiling with that ease that always stung, "you're here." I looked at the way Stephen's hand hovered at the small of her back. He stepped away like a teenager caught. "She didn't feel well," he said quickly. "I was just taking care of her," I said. The cramp grabbed me low and hard, and I excused myself with dignity I didn't feel. In the bathroom, blood bloomed. Not flood, but warning. I called Stephen because what else do you do when your life is a cliff? He didn't pick up. He called back. I heard muffled voices. Vivian's compassionate, breathy, stage-whispered, "It's okay. Go." It wasn't okay. It was obscene. I hung up and called the only person who had ever showed up when my life burned down. Molly Carter, the girl who'd given me her scarf in 8th grade when I didn't have one, the woman who once drove me to urgent care at 2 a.m. and held my hair while I puked up nothing. Molly collected me curbside like stolen art and heard the whole ugly thing as we idled at a red light. "You can't have his kid," she said, blunt and shaking. "You can't tie yourself to him forever while you're fighting for your life." "It's not about him," I said, hand over my abdomen as if I could barter with biology. "It's about me. It might be the only person who will ever love me without conditions." "I love you," she snapped, eyes wet. "And I want you here when we're 80 at a terrible club in Miami, okay? Don't make me go alone." She found a gynecologic oncologist across town, marched me into a consult room, and sat there squeezing my fingers while medicine weighed me on its scales. The consensus dangerous either way. Surgery now meant erasing any chance at a future pregnancy I might not live to try for. Delaying meant letting the cancer write my timeline. No one could say which path would lead me out. Vivian found us in the waiting room. Stephen had left his phone in her coat, she'd answered when the specialist called him. She came with her sorrow polished and her voice tuned to tender. "Grace," she said, "do you want me to get Stephen?" 0-6. He's frantic. Molly was up out of her chair before I could stop her. "You don't get to play saint," she told Vivian, voice low and precise. "You don't get to accidentally date your sister's husband, turn her into your mannequin, then cry pretty when the camera's on." 2 sharp slaps. The receptionist gasped. Vivian's hand flew to her cheek, then dropped. Her eyes shone, but her mouth stayed careful. She'd had practice looking hurt. I took Molly's arm and steered her out before we gave the hospital a show. In the parking garage, I turned my phone off because sometimes that's the only control left, refusing to receive. It felt like silence was a room I could choose. We packed a bag from the back of my closet jeans that still smelled like college, sneakers with dirt from hiking trails in New Hampshire, a sweatshirt that hadn't been approved by anyone but me. I left the silk blouses and all the perfumes that made me smell like Vivian on their glass altar in our bathroom. I called a lawyer I'd trained with back when I thought Hale would mean home and asked her to send Stephen divorce papers. I signed a lease on a one-bedroom in Somerville that overlooked a bakery and a bus stop. The landlord didn't ask why my hands shook. 3 days later, I powered my phone up. Stephen's messages stacked like a courthouse. Where are you? Come home. I know about your diagnosis. We need to remove the pregnancy and treat aggressively. That's your best shot. He was right about the medicine. He was wrong about me. I'd already made my bargain with time. If time was a miser, I would still spend it the way I chose. I texted him a single sentence I'm filing. Then I turned my phone over and stared at the ceiling until words stopped moving. The next ding wasn't Stephen. It was a news alert. Woman injured in fall, stable, identity withheld. My phone rang before I could tap the link. Grace, Stephen said, voice stripped. Vivian jumped. She hadn't died. She'd taken a balcony and turned it into a performance of grief that splashed our hospital in gossip. He begged me to come to the ward so he could keep me in a place he understood. I told him to sign the papers. He tried another play remorse. The first, I'm sorry of our marriage, dropped into my ear like a penny into a well. I didn't know you were sick, he said, voice ragged. You didn't look, I said. We didn't break because I got sick. We broke because I was furniture. The next day, Vivian had Molly arrested for assault. It was theatrical and effective, nothing the hospital loves more than a morality play. I went to Vivian's room and told her to drop the charges. She wept into those perfect hands. I only wanted you to come see me, she said. You wanted to clean the narrative, I said. Release my friend. Stephen stood behind her, watching me as if I were someone who might evaporate. He tried wife. He put his arms around me in the hallway and said it like a talisman, wife, wife, wife. Nurses glanced away. Vivian's mouth tightened. I told him I would sign only if he agreed to leave the pregnancy alone. He hesitated, argued, folded. He was brilliant in theaters with lights and protocols. He didn't know what to do with a woman who didn't want to be saved on his terms. We went home to the brownstone and slept in different rooms. He started cooking as if the kitchen could absolve him. He made curry beef the way I used to on Sunday nights because he claimed beef was the only meat worth eating. He spooned some into my bowl with an odd, hopeful gentleness. I'm allergic to beef, I said, and his face broke in a way I didn't enjoy. Vivian loves it, I added, not cruel, just accurate. I started bleeding in the night. He slept on the floor beside my bed with a blanket pulled up to his chin and woke every time I shifted. He took calls from his parents in the hallway, where they hissed about liability and legacy. He came back in and held a glass to my lips while I threw up bile. Thank you, I said once, because manners had been my armor since childhood. He flinched like a boy, being told he'd done well. He began to lose weight, the way grief takes 30-year-old men by surprise. I lost faster. The nurses on our floor called me bird-boned in their texts and snuck protein drinks into the fridge in the break room. The department chief patted Stephen's shoulder and said, "Take care of her. Call me if you need anything." I asked to see my labs. Stephen handed them over without a fight. The numbers leaned toward no. In the car after my check, Stephen stared through the windshield until his eyes went red. "I'm begging you," he said, and I realized I'd never heard him beg for anything. "Let me fix this. Let me take the baby and do the surgery. We'll try again when you're well." "I won't be well," I said. That's not how this story ends. He pressed his forehead to the steering wheel and kept it there until the sun pinned lines across the hospital garage. I watched the light climb the concrete and tried to memorize the way the day shifted colors. I wanted to remember ordinary things. When my parents came to see Vivian, the hall outside her room turned into a courtroom. My mother scolded in a voice she used for spilled milk and failed report cards. My father invoked money and how far it ought to carry them in foreign retirement. Vivian snapped back, raw as I'd never seen her, accusing them of loving trophies more than children, of forgetting her broken wrist at 8, of selling a house while I was at school, and leaving me a note on the counter that said, simply, "Will call." She said my name once, and for a flash, I saw us as girls. One of us in lace and one of us in a hand-me-down dress, both of us hungry in different ways. Vivian lunged for my wrist. "Don't you hate them?" she demanded, shaking, as if my agreement could sanctify her rage. I thought of puberty alone in a bathroom, of an apartment lock changed without notice, of monitor beeps and surgical consent lines I signed myself. Hate is heavy. I didn't have the time to carry it. "This isn't my war," I said, and pulled free. Stephen walked me to his office and shut the door on everyone else. "The baby's okay," he told me after the ultrasound, relief so obvious it felt indecent. "The margins haven't changed." "Then we do the divorce tomorrow," I said. His mouth opened and closed. It was the first time I'd watched language fail him. "I wanted you to love me," I told him, not unkindly. "You loved a memory." "It happens." He folded to his knees beside my chair and set his forehead against my belly like it was an altar. It would have been romantic if it had not been too late. His tears warmed the fabric of my dress. I put my hand on his hair because touch is cheap, and sometimes the kindest thing you can give is what you can afford. He said, very quietly, "Please," and I couldn't. He signed. We filed. The month the court asks you to wait rolled out like an empty road. He settled into a pattern that looked like penance. He learned the names of the nurses who slid warm blankets over my legs during infusions. He took goofy pictures of the therapy dog and sent them to me. He bought milkshakes for my friends and asked them what I actually liked to eat. He stopped visiting Vivian except the times he had to. The other doctors began circling her recovery like interns around a favorite attending. Vivian, who had always had a full roster of admirers, discovered that adoration could be a renewable resource. My body learned new tricks. Nausea leaned over me like a tide and pulled back. Pain sketched lines across my abdomen and retreated. I swallowed pills whose names sounded like prayers in a language I would never bear. I kept the baby. I named him in my head for days when names were talismans. I kept working 2 shifts a week until our chief took my badge and said, "Go home, Hart. You've earned your rest." The way she said my maiden name made something in my chest unclench. I thought about destiny and stupid luck, and how often we confuse them. I thought about the night Stephen proposed in our kitchen with Chinese takeout and no ring, because he'd forgotten how literal romance could be. I thought about the deed transfer my parents signed the same month, selling my childhood to help Vivian's career survive a winter in Berlin. I thought about the first time Stephen had cupped the back of my head and said, "You make me feel calm," and how a man's calm can cost a woman her shape. When labor started, it was messy and early, the way bad weather rolls into a city with no courtesy. Stephen drove me to the hospital at 3 a.m. with his hazard lights blinking and his jaw broken with fear. He stayed at my shoulder through the hours of blood and steel and the doctor's voice, steady and spare. He held our son for a minute before they took him to the warmer, and he looked at that tiny, furious face like a man watching a sunrise he didn't think he'd live to see. I watched it too. It was enough. After, the room became quiet except for the rhythmic machines and the soft fuss of a newborn, learning how to be a person. Stephen cried into his hands. Molly sang badly under her breath. A nurse tucked a blanket tight across my legs with the kind of tenderness people think is simple until they realize it's a skill. I fell asleep with a feeling I hadn't had since I was 9. Before things got complicated, the conviction that I'd done one right thing and that it would leave a mark. I didn't live long. This isn't a twist. My body had been keeping score since the day the first cell miscopied, and you don't bargain with arithmetic. I signed the last of the papers with Molly's name, where it mattered for the future. She had been diagnosed years ago with a uterus that would never cooperate. She had never wanted marriage. She wanted a life that looked like hers. She promised to raise my boy in the sunlight with a lock on the door and too many books and no one telling him his softness was a flaw. I believed her. I trusted her the way some people trust saints. The month after my funeral, Stephen started sending Molly links to clinical trials, like prayers written in URLs. She thanked him. She didn't click. He called twice a week for the first year, then once a week, then once a month. He asked for pictures. Molly sent them. He sent checks without notes. Molly cashed them and put the money in an account with our son's name on it. When Stephen showed up with a bike, Molly made him put a helmet on and run behind the seat like a teenager, while the kid pedaled down the sidewalk, shrieking with joy. Later, when the boy was asleep, she told Stephen he could visit and read bedtime stories. She did not let him hold her keys. Time did what it does, blunted some edges, sharpened others. Vivian remarried a man who ran a gallery and wore turtlenecks in June. My parents moved to Florida and sent Christmas cards with gold foil and palm trees. Molly taught my son to make grilled cheese in a cast iron pan and to hold doors open and to say no, like a complete sentence. Sometimes Stephen drove to the cemetery alone in his hospital scrubs and sat on the grass telling me about difficult cases as if I were across the kitchen table, because grief makes you practical and absurd. When our son was 7, he asked why his last name didn't match either parent's. Molly ruffled his hair and said, "Because you got the best one." When other kids at school told him he didn't have a family, he told them he had two, a doctor who ran beside his bike and a woman who danced in the kitchen with a wooden spoon as a microphone. He brought a bouquet of dandelions to my headstone and stuck stickers around the photo that made my mother gasp and Molly laugh. "Do you think she can see them?" 0. 6, he asked Stephen, who squatted so his eyes were level. "I think she sees the way you're kind," Stephen said. "And that's better." When he was 9, he wanted to know what my voice sounded like. Sometimes I think I hear it when he laughs with his whole face. Sometimes I think it's the wind through the maples on our old street. Sometimes I think it's the ocean that never asked anyone for permission to be big. I hope he hears it when he needs to and not much when he doesn't. I hope Stephen remembers that love is not curation. That calling someone wife is not a spell that freezes time. That a woman is not a set of preferences you can reorder until she resembles a ghost you couldn't keep. I hope Vivian is happy. I hope my parents learn to look their children in the eye. I hope my son grows up unafraid of tenderness. I hope he understands that you can be brave and still be gentle, that choosing the person you'll be every day, again, is the only miracle any of us get. I don't haunt the house where Stephen alphabetized spices. I don't watch from street corners when Molly buys strawberries and holds the carton up to judge the berries by their scent. I don't hover in the grocery store when our son chooses a cereal based on a cartoon animal and not the fiber content. If I am anywhere, I am in the small muscle that lifts when he smiles, and in the softness of Molly's voice when she says his name across a playground, and in the way Stephen sits on a curb after a long shift, his head in his hands, knowing there are things medicine can't keep. This is not a tragedy or a moral. It is a life. It is mine. I was a nurse who kept lists, and a woman who chose to keep a baby, and a girl who wanted a home so badly she married a man who mistook resemblance for love. I was a thorn he never forgot. Not out of spite, but because I proved he could feel. I was Grace Hart before and after I took his last name, and there are worse fates than being remembered by the people you loved for the ways you made them softer. On a gray morning in October, years after the papers and the handshakes and the casseroles, Stephen drove out to the cemetery with a thermos of coffee and a stethoscope still looped around his neck. He sat cross-legged in the damp and told the air about a patient who'd made it and one who hadn't. He told me our son had learned to skate and that he'd fallen hard and gotten up grinning. He said he knew that mistake he'd made at 29 and 30, and 31 confusing control with care, had cost us the better story we might have had. He said he was learning. Later that day, Molly took a photo I wish I could have taken. Our son stood on a little league field with his cap crooked and his mouth open mid-yell, cheeks split with joy. You can see it if you look closely, the way his face holds 3 people at once. The man who runs behind him in case the bike wobbles. The woman who makes 3 grilled cheeses on the first day of school because 1 might not be enough. And the mother who chose him once in the only way she could. He doesn't know it yet. He will. That is the one bet I made and won. The end.